The combat of Odyssey is similar to that of Origins. It has the same basic mechanics, light and strong attacks, dodging, parrying, and unique weapon animations for each weapon type. The main difference is that we do not have a shield. Instead, we wield the broken spear of Leonidas in our offhand. Defense-wise, we need to focus on parrying and dodging to avoid taking damage. Personally, I hate the fact that they got rid of the shield when we get to visit ancient Greece. Sparta has one of the most famous shields, and we don't get to use it. Very disappointing for me, but I understand why they did it. By removing the shield, we aren't able to hide behind it for ages, and essentially turn our brains off. Instead, we are forced to focus on dodging and parrying in more active and aggressive combat. I actually think the developers made a good decision to push the combat in this direction. Unfortunately, in practice, this doesn't work out exactly as planned. You see, enemies in the game of course come in all sorts of difficulties, from basic weak enemies to elite mercenary soldiers. However, what makes these enemies tougher is just their numerical values. Slap a yellow health bar on them and suddenly their health fucking skyrockets into absurdity. I will touch on this in a future section as well, but Odyssey has a unique problem due to its level scaling. No matter what, enemies will always scale to your level. This means no matter what part of the world you go to, enemies will be the same. This also means they can't make mechanically tough enemies in high-level zones, because every zone is the same. This also means the only way to make them more difficult is to make them fucking damage sponges. So combat devolves from strategy to mindlessly beating the crap out of people until they finally die. And holy shit, even in cutscenes, there's so much of this nonsense. Like, how is this even remotely necessary, Cassandra? The guy is dead 20 times over. Calm down, you psychopath. Anyway, this is where talents and abilities come into play. You have 3 separate talent trees: Hunter, Warrior, and Assassin. The gear you get will improve the damage done from these 3 trees. Since enemy health bars are so high, these abilities need to inflate their damage to compensate. Speaking of which, Odyssey has a massive inflation issue, as numbers across the entire game just get so absurdly huge for no reason. In regards to damage, it is very hard to understand what your numbers even mean. What is the difference between 500 damage and 5,000 damage? Who knows, because the game doesn't fucking tell you. What a surprise. However, the real issue is with the use of the abilities themselves and not the damage output. You are actually able to chain abilities together for extended periods of time. In their final upgraded forms, multiple abilities can be chained together for 30 or more seconds of just constantly beating the crap out of a single person. This is where the combat devolves, because it is not remotely worth the time to slowly poke down the enemy with basic attacks. It is significantly better to use abilities, especially because of the damage immunity you get while performing an ability. You can't be damaged once you start your attack, so even large groups of enemies are not actually threatening to you. You can essentially AFK during fights with these tougher enemies. Why bother trying to dodge or parry attacks when you can pop an ability without any risk whatsoever and deal unbelievably more damage? If that wasn't enough, the abilities themselves are pretty fucking ridiculous. They start out fairly simple, like a powerful kick or a way to disarm an opponent from their shield. It quickly turns into godlike powerful attacks from nowhere. That isn't even an exaggeration. Upon hitting rank 3 of an ability, many become ridiculous attacks that you have no business performing. Instead of just disarming an enemy of their shield, it has to fucking explode into a million pieces in a giant burst of light. What on earth could I have done to cause such a thing? There isn't an explanation given in the game. The reason this is so bad is because there is no progression to this end result. We start out as a basic mercenary. Then, we put our broken spear into a tablet, spend a talent point, and bam, we have godlike abilities. This is so jarring. If you listen closely, you can sometimes faintly hear enemies commenting on how suddenly you've become a god. Even the random people in this game are shocked by whatever the fuck is happening. This has a huge impact on immersion. Immersion is actually a huge issue for Odyssey. How is anybody supposed to connect to a character that suddenly and randomly gains powers for no reason? Speaking of getting powers for no reason, there is also a talent in the tree that we gain automatically by hitting level 20. Now, normally you would expect when falling from a great height to take some fall damage. Well, when you hit level 20, you just don't take fall damage. Ever. Period. I don't even need to use a talent point for this. It isn't some ability at the end of a tree that has prerequisites. Nope, it is just given to you for free. What possible reason could there be to remove fall damage arbitrarily at level 20? Why not have it unlocked from the get-go? The ability pre-level 20 prevents you from dying from fall damage, but that at least has some consequences to it. Enemies can still hit and kill you if you make a mistake and fall in the wrong place. But nope, wait, I'm level 20 now, so I can jump off literally anything without a care in the world. This completely fucking shatters immersion. Without any reasonable explanation, and the suddenness of which it just happens, it removes any relatability to this character. I have never been pulled out of a game faster than this. What else can we take away from the talents? Well, this is only my personal experience, but I found the Hunter talent tree to be completely useless. I almost never used my bow throughout the entire game. I found that my other abilities could accomplish anything I would ever do with the bow, but better. I already went over how I can chain abilities together and almost not even partake in combat altogether. However, even in stealthy situations, I have more flexibility with assassinations. By using the Rush Assassination ability, I can take out multiple enemies from afar and also prevent any retaliation if I'm ever even seen. Why even bother with the bow at that rate? There is even a talent in the assassin tree that deletes bodies from existence if I assassinate them. Cause you know, I'm a god that can do whatever I want apparently, so I don't need to worry about leaving behind evidence. Plus, on top of that, I'd need to divert stats away from the other trees to make use of the bow. I imagine you can find some good use for it, but I found it to be a bit worthless. It was kind of disappointing to feel like a third of the talents I had no reason to use. Don't worry though, if you don't like the talents you've taken, you can always respec. The idea of a respec is pretty nice. It gives you options as you go through the journey. If you are having an issue, respecing into a build that suits the situation better is always an option. The issue though is how easy it is to respec. You can do so at any time and anywhere. It simply costs a little bit of money. But as I said before, there is a massive inflation issue. Not just the damage and health values are ridiculously high, the resources are as well. You get so much fucking money. Holy shit. Seriously, the amount of money you get through the game is absurd. At no point is there any concern over your money, so respecing essentially has no cost to it at all. The option to respec is nice, but there should be a con of sorts. Perhaps having to go out of your way to a specific place, or collecting a not rare but specific currency for it. Without some sort of relevant cost, I just spec exactly as the situation requires without a second thought. The respec option is very important too if you want to make use of all of the abilities the talents have to offer. In order to use an ability, you have to assign it to your ability wheel. You'll end up with 2 melee wheels and 1 ranged wheel. But you get more abilities in the talent tree than you can fit on your wheels. It's just bizarre. There aren't any restrictions for most of the abilities too, so you can just pick them up at any time. Why would I have access to everything, but not be able to use a bunch of them? It isn't for strategic reasons, since there's no restrictions of any kind. It isn't like the abilities have typings, and you can only put a single typing on each wheel. Like your fire and poison weapon buffs would count as a single ability type, but instead I can take both and either waste talent points or waste wheel space. Again, it's so bizarre how this is designed. It gets more bizarre when you consider the Atlantis DLC talent upgrades. In the 3 DLC zones, you will find Keeper's Insights, which upgrade a singular ability. You don't get to choose which ability is upgraded. The insight will always upgrade the same thing, which I find to be a massive waste of potential. There could have been a lot of customization with this system, allowing you a limited number of upgrades, but letting you upgrade any ability you wanted from a list. Instead, you find an insight and get an upgrade for an ability you might not even use. It feels like such a waste of time to go find these insights at that rate. These upgrades can be turned on and off at will. Whenever you want, just decide to turn it off if you like. There is no cost, no downside, no thought at all that goes into this. Why not just make it something automatic? The game already removed fall damage automatically for no reason. Why not just buff everything else too? Why make us find insights? The talent design is just all over the place. One thing I do appreciate is the post-game talent progression. Once you get to level 50, you can spend talent points to improve yourself in very specific stats. These are the same stats you'd see on your gear, like improved warrior damage or improved damage with spears, something along those lines. While it suffers from the same respec problem, it at least lets you use excess talent points in more positive ways. The Atlantis DLC areas provide whole talent points for certain bonus objectives as well, so as you continue to level, you can customize your character in more specific ways. Odyssey also has a unique mercenary system. Essentially, if you commit a crime like stealing or murder, you can amass a bounty on yourself. Eventually, with a big enough bounty, other mercenaries will begin to hunt you down. These mercenaries are considered elite mobs and have affixes that provide them with bonuses such as immunity to poison damage as an example. In concept, I really like the mercenary system. It provides consequences to your actions in a unique way. Mercenaries will track you down regardless of where you go. Stealing too much or killing people in public places won't just cause an issue in that specific town or area. The consequence is lasting, and those mercenaries, if fought in public places, can cause even more issues and more mercenaries sent after you. Unfortunately, there is a glaring flaw with this system. You see, you can actually pay off your own bounty. And that is where the inflation issue affects the mercenary system. You always have an abundance of money, so paying off your bounty is stupid easy. On top of this, you pay off the bounty on the map screen. You don't have to speak to anybody or run to the person holding your bounty. Nope, you just pause the game to pay it off. This makes the entire system completely irrelevant. It causes the unique and effective system to become a pathetic waste of time. Also, it's worth noting that this system is completely dropped by the time the Atlantis DLC comes around. In all three areas, the mercenary system is completely disabled, almost as if it wasn't worth programming in. Overall, it's a real shame. We also have conquest battles. These are battles that decide which faction controls a zone, Sparta or Athens. You generally have to weaken a nation's hold on a region before having a battle, although a few are just naturally a part of the main story. These battles are essentially just a field with a ton of enemies in it. There isn't a whole lot to it, just go hit stuff. These battles are one of the weakest aspects of the game. They are extremely hollow in their gameplay, and the end result is just basically meaningless. All enemy units, regardless of whether they belong to Sparta or Athens, behave and even look exactly the same. The only thing these battles do is decide which color armor they wear. Strangely, if you weaken a hold on an area, you can still fight for the nation that holds the area. You can slaughter dozens of Athenians to then fight for Athens in control of the region. How ass backwards is that? The main draw of these battles, as with most combat in the game, is meant to be gear and experience. Let's discuss gear first. Gear comes with all sorts of improvements to your stats. Improving a general damage type like Hunter or Warrior, or increasing more specific things like damage with spears, gear's purpose is generally just damage increases. There are a decent amount of combinations, and even legendary sets with extra bonuses to mess around with. So of course, you could customize your character's stats to best suit your build. However, yet again, the inflation issue strikes. There is a fucking retarded amount of gear that drops in this game. You will never have a hard time finding a new piece of gear. Your bags are flooded with so much shit, you will essentially just be swapping items until you find the perfect one, which then you break down all other gear into materials to upgrade said gear. It's such a joke. Then there's experience, and oh boy, is there an experience issue in Odyssey. The issue kind of ties into their in-game shop. The shop sells an experience boost, which has led to the idea that experience gains were reduced to encourage a purchase. Now, you don't need to buy this boost, but it doesn't take a scientist to realize how people have come to this conclusion. It can take quite a bit of running around doing random nonsense to level up. I will discuss this more in a section with questing, but for now, just note that experience isn't all that rewarding. So your two main draws to conquest battles are essentially irrelevant. Cool, guess they are pointless then. I suppose it's time to talk about the boat. Greece is made up of a multitude of islands, and we must use our ship to reach them. But the sea is not safe from bandits or the war between Athens and Sparta. So we have naval combat. And I hate it. I can't stress enough how much I hate naval combat. I spoke briefly about my disdain for the ship missions in Origins, but the ship has a much bigger role in Odyssey. When it comes to the combat, we are very limited in our offensive capabilities. We are able to ram into other ships at close range, throw javelins from medium range, and shoot arrows at long range. And those are your options. The entirety of naval combat is rapidly using an ability and then waiting for your cooldowns to return. There is so much waiting. This is made even more annoying when you consider the constant motion of the water. Both you and the water are moving, which can easily mess up your aim, wasting some of your ammo and making you wait even longer. There are upgrades for our ship that give you more damage and maybe another slot for javelins and arrows. These upgrades also require a metric fuck ton of your resources. Not exaggerating either, the resource cost to upgrade anything on the ship is absurd. But then again, we have so many spare resources that it makes me think that the resources were inflated to begin with because of the ship. We do get an additional weapon in the Hidden Blade DLC. We put a giant flamethrower on the front of our ship. While its main purpose is to shoot fire out of your ship, it also lets you spend your fire on flaming arrows and javelins. Since the flamethrower requires super close range, the flame arrows and javelins are significantly more useful. So it really doesn't help the monotony of waiting for those cooldowns constantly. Outside of combat, we need to use the ship for travel. So much traveling. Odyssey is a pretty big map, but easily half of it is just empty water. There are times when you can basically put down the controller because you will be sailing in a straight line for way too long. In terms of the mechanics of Odyssey, the ship is by far the weakest aspect of the game. Also, worth noting, the boat was another mechanic abandoned when the Atlantis DLC came out. You completely lose access to the ship's mechanics in all three areas, despite it being shoved in your face in the Hidden Blade DLC. I just found it interesting, so I wanted to make note of it. Overall, the mechanics of Odyssey are a complete downgrade from its predecessor. There are a few interesting ideas, but when implemented, things don't work out exactly as intended. Conquest battles are completely pointless. The ease of respeccing removes all thought from picking talents. The ease of paying off bounties makes the otherwise unique mercenary system a complete joke. The absurd and over-the-top abilities destroy incentive to partake in basic combat due to their invulnerability and massive damage. I feel like the developers try to do and explore a ton of new ideas. Unfortunately, they did it all at once. They jammed so many things at once that they didn't allow themselves to really develop those ideas. It causes these ideas to become incredibly simplistic, like in the case of talents and respeccing. The mercenary system would be infinitely more impactful if you simply couldn't just pause the game and pay it off. A lot of these issues could be fixed in relatively small ways. But it seems the sheer clusterfuck of things happening caused a lot of oversights to occur, to the extreme detriment of the game. It is difficult to discuss the characters of Odyssey. There are a ton of them, most of which are very insignificant. They are thrown away almost as quickly as they are introduced, never to be seen again. But the real reason it's so difficult is that all of the characters we do see consistently are extremely one-dimensional. As I have discussed and repeated many times already, the choices made have no real consequences, so the characters have to act very rigidly, so that all of our choices are technically relevant. This leads to a severe lack of any character development. Now, I won't go over every single character since there are so many, but I will take a few that I find most disappointing. You might expect me to start with Cassandra, since she is our character, but I actually don't have a lot to say about her. The game throws a dialogue choice at us for almost every single conversation we have with anybody. Again, regardless of outcome. Nothing is really set in stone. She can be all over the place depending on the player. Now, it isn't an issue to have a blank slate of a character, so the player can put themselves in the avatar's shoes and develop them as they want to. But Cassandra isn't a blank slate. Even she has to follow the linear story. So, instead of Cassandra, how about her best friend, Phoebe? From the very start of the game, Phoebe is shown to be almost like a little sister to Cassandra. She often gets into trouble, as you might expect of an orphan kid living on their own. Phoebe is actually my favorite person we meet throughout the story. I like her premise, and felt that she had a lot of potential. After we leave Kefalonia, Phoebe ends up in Athens working for Aspasia, which is where we find her next. She traveled quite a long distance not only for a child, but an orphan child in ancient Greece. But we hear nothing of this experience. Did she meet anybody? Did she have a difficult journey at all? Or did she magically teleport to Athens because the developers wanted her there? She doesn't act any different. She's still the same kid. When we return to Athens after the initial search for our mother, the entire city is afflicted by a sickness. But during the chaos, the cult murders Phoebe. There are a few issues here that might not immediately be noticed. Phoebe herself wasn't allowed to grow as a character, but that's okay, because it can and is tried to be used as development for Cassandra instead. That could work. It certainly had potential to. But then we must remember that nothing has ever changed. This is unbelievable, but other than the immediate cutscene, Phoebe is essentially just forgotten. We get her name once or twice in passing, but the next time we really even bring her up is after the main story is completed, where we visit her grave for 5 seconds. What the actual fuck? The game expects me to care about a character that the game itself forgets? Cassandra doesn't change, so what was the point of her death? What was the point of her character at all? Now, I immediately saw a connection between Odyssey and Origins here. Phoebe's death reminded me of Shadia. Both were children who are murdered by their respective bad guys. Shadia, however, despite getting significantly less screen time, has a massively more impactful death. Shadia was a way to develop Bayek further. The situation was similar to what happened to him, which started him on his journey. It drove him further down the path of vengeance, and the cutscene with the crocodile is filled with passion and emotion because of it. It also showed a perfect example of how ruthless the Order really was. They were willing to kill a child to send a message, and try to demoralize the opposition. It also let Bayek connect with another family who suffered as he did, and they would later become co-founders of his new brotherhood. Shadia's death accomplishes so much in such a little bit of time. It is expertly handled and an amazing bit of storytelling in Origins. Phoebe's death, on the other hand, accomplishes jack shit. I immediately felt the connections to Shadia almost as if they were trying to replicate that emotional moment. But it falls flat on its face because we don't see the consequences. Everybody has to follow the motions. They need to say and do exactly what they need to in order to maintain the illusion that your choices mean something, while still pushing the story forward. So again, what was the point of her character? Why was she here? Why should I care about anything she said or did? It's a real shame, because it had the potential to be just as powerful of a moment. Phoebe is even brought back in the second part of the Atlantis DLC. She lost her memory and is wandering around the underworld. Now we can restore her memory, and she asks us why we didn't save her, which is an excellent entryway into exploring very emotional concepts. Possibly, we can talk about how Phoebe felt so let down Cassandra wasn't there for her. Or again, we can explore Cassandra's side of the story, and finally let her process her death the way she should have earlier on in the plot. But instead, we go back to just being friends right off the bat, and go look for her parents. It isn't very believable when characters act like cardboard cutouts, not reacting to the things around them. We also have Brasidas. Honestly, I have no idea why Brasidas even exists. He is introduced to us when we leave Athens to look for clues on our mother. We rescue some hostages and light a building on fire. During this fight with the guards, Brasidas literally jumps in from off-screen out of fucking nowhere and helps you fight. No context, nothing is said, just random Spartan is helping you now. Afterward, we get to chatting, and he says he's been helping the Hetairai in the area, the exact ones we're helping. Yet, nobody mentioned him? Probably would have been useful knowledge. His introduction is awkward as it is, but then he has to be special in some way, right? You wouldn't just throw a random character at us in such a fashion if he wasn't super important? Well, he gives us advice on how to take down the cultists in the area, and then disappears. We see him next in Sparta when we try to retake our home. He again gives us advice. Then we see him when we take down the Archon, which he gives us advice. And so he eventually asks us to join in battle with him, to which he is bitch-slapped by Deimos. He survives that altercation to fight Deimos again and die. I just described everything Brasidas does. I am not exaggerating. He is just exposition. He literally just tells us about the situation we are in. Anyone can do it. Any fucking random Spartan soldier, hell, a random NPC, could tell us everything he tells us. He is completely pointless, but the game acts like he's our super close awesome friend, and we should care when Deimos smacks him around. He is the definition of the word replaceable. So again, I ask, what is the actual point of Brasidas? He accomplishes nothing and is essentially just a basic Spartan soldier. There are so many opportunities when he could have been a really interesting person too. He could have been our eyes into the life of a Spartan. He could have been our war-torn soldier and showed us the effects that the Peloponnesian War was having on not just the populace, but the militaries as well. For example, when we hunt the Archon, Brasidas advocates that we spare him. He argues that the Archon produces so much food for the region that killing him would end up hurting innocent people. Marini, our mother, advocates that it's too dangerous to leave a cultist alive. This gives us two sides to consider that both would have had amazing insights into what these two really are. Brasidas, being a soldier and seeing the effects of the war, could tell us about the many lives he's seen destroyed, and how the innocent should be the priority. He could give examples of his military career where perhaps a situation like this occurred for him, and he believes that we should always be the better man. Meanwhile, Marini could give us the insight into her sorrow and loss. She had everything taken from her by these people, and knows their potential for more suffering. She could go into detail about her life after she lost her family to the cult, and how she doesn't want that happening to anybody else. Or, she could even argue that it might hurt the people in the region short term, but by destroying the cult, it would save even more people down the line. This whole situation could be a great discussion on the topic of the lives of the few versus the many. And Brasidas is an excellent opportunity to get us into that discussion. Except it doesn't happen. None of this happens. We are given the two options, kill or spare. That's it. No consequences, no effects, nothing matters. Brasidas will continue to just be Brasidas. I can't tell you what motivates him. I can't tell you why he served Sparta. I can't tell you anything about him, other than that he's a respected soldier and looks out for the innocent. Which I don't even know why he looks out for the innocent. I don't know anything about him. If there isn't a point, why have him here? Brasidas is another person brought back in the Atlantis DLC. His entire questline is about finding peace in the underworld and to move on to Elysium. He is told he needs to defeat what defeated him in life. It is assumed to be Deimos, but that is incorrect. We come across the spirit of a woman that tells us Spartans destroyed her village, and Brasidas killed her husband and accidentally killed her unborn child. The woman's spirit calls him Brasidas the Butcher. But hold up a second. Let's take a closer look at this. The spirit initially tells us her village was occupied, trained, and armed by Athens. Now that is a very important thing to note, because as I just mentioned, Brasidas is a Spartan soldier serving in the Peloponnesian War. This is a fucking war. Sparta is in active conflict with Athens and all of its territories. You wear their armor and live in their fucking territory. You are a part of Athens. She does mention they didn't expect the war to come to them, but that's no excuse for when it actually does. I am not going to claim to be an expert on war, but holy shit, she is acting like Sparta had no right to do anything. She's also specifically mentioned that Spartans destroyed her village, not Brasidas. While he might be amongst them, he isn't the only person at fault here. But he did kill her husband, who attacked him. Then, in the commotion of defending himself, her unborn baby died too. Now, I can understand her specific hatred for them, but then he is given the title of Butcher. Like he single-handedly did all of it. The game tries to make Brasidas out to be this super bad guy, but for all he knew, he was killing Athenian soldiers, as his job is in this war. Stepping back and taking just a moment to think about it turns this whole thing into a fucking mess. Stuff just seems to happen because a developer said so, not because it makes any sense. Fucking hell, you can do this for anybody. Anybody in the entire game. Taking one small look at them and they are devoid of character. They're just planks of wood going through the motions. Let's take a random one, shall we? How about Leonidas? He is briefly shown at the very beginning, but not much else is done with him until the fate of Atlantis. We actually find him in Elysium. He is Cassandra's grandfather, and arguably one of the more famous historical warriors. Quite a lot of possibilities here. But the extent of his participation in the DLC is a quick sparring match with us, where he then joins the rebellion. Then we are promised by Persephone that if we kill him, she can bring back anybody we want from death to meet again. Another one of those killer spare choices. And could you guess what happens next? If you guessed nothing, you'd be correct. Spare him, kill him, but that's it. He doesn't do anything else. What a waste. I'd say one of the most developed characters in the game is Nikolaos, which isn't saying a whole lot, but still. When we are a kid, he is a loving father, and he reluctantly makes the choice to throw us and Alexios off the cliff. When we confront him, he shows regret for what he did. Since I let him live, I got to see him leave his army behind to regain his honor. He tries to make up for the mistakes he's done and find peace. When he returns, he doesn't immediately assume command again, but rather encourages Stentor to be the leader. There isn't a whole lot, but at least it's something, and I appreciate that in this sea of nonsense. Now, perhaps one might say I am looking too far into this, but I'd argue otherwise. In Odyssey, we are supposed to be making our own story, as I've said multiple times. And characters are important to a story. More so than that, though, is the sheer amount of potential that these characters in the game have. When we look at the game as a whole, there are quite a lot of systems that have major issues or just don't work. Conquest battles are pointless. The mercenary system flops hard since I can constantly pay off my bounty with massive stores of cash. The 30 billion pieces of gear with all their random stats, the in-game store, which I'll discuss later on in detail, all of these things take time to program and implement. All of the countless voice lines for random quests need to be implemented. This stuff takes time and resources away from the other aspects of the game. I will forever praise Origins for the sheer amount of development in extremely small periods of time. Meanwhile, Odyssey has just so much nonsense going on, paired with a terrible story implementation, that they lose out on the massive potential that they have available. Thank you for watching part 2 of my critique of Assassin's Creed Odyssey. I hope you all enjoyed, and I will see you next time.